It is a story about a child. And about a pilot. About a desert. A rose. A fox. And a sky full of distant lights. This is The Little Prince. A story that seems small at first. But some things only appear small because we have forgotten how to see them as we grow older. So tonight, we begin here. When I was 6 years old, I came across a picture in a book about the primeval forest. It was not a large book, nor a particularly important one, but something about that image stayed with me. The picture showed a great snake, a boa constrictor, in the act of swallowing an animal whole. There were no dramatic colors, no sense of movement, only a quiet certainty. The book explained that such snakes do not chew their prey. They swallow it whole, and then, unable to move, they sleep for months, slowly digesting what they have taken in. I remember closing the book and thinking about it for a very long time. Not with fear, but with a kind of quiet fascination. I tried to imagine what it would feel like to hold something so large inside you, and to carry it silently. And then, as children often do, I decided to draw it. It was not a complicated drawing. Just a simple shape, curved and closed, as if something were hidden inside it. When I finished, I looked at it for a while, trying to decide whether it felt complete. And then, I brought it to the grown-ups. I asked them, very seriously, if my drawing frightened them. They looked at it, only for a moment, and then they said, "Frighten? Why should anyone be frightened? By a hat?" A hat. That is what they saw. So I drew another picture. This time, I opened the shape. I showed them the inside, the animal within the snake, so that they would understand. But even then, something did not change. They did not see it, as I did. And it was not because they were unkind. Only that, in some quiet way, they had already forgotten how. The grown-ups did not ask me questions. They did not wonder what I had meant. They did not pause long enough to look again. Instead, they gave me advice. They told me, with quiet certainty, that I should put aside my drawings, that such things were not important, that it would be better to focus on something useful. Geography, history, arithmetic, grammar, subjects that could be measured, subjects that could be explained. And so, at the age of 6, I set my drawings aside. Not because I no longer wanted to draw, because no one seemed to understand what I had seen. It is a strange thing to stop doing something, not because it disappears, but because it is not recognized. So I learned to see the world in the way that grown-ups prefer. I learned to speak in facts, in numbers, in things that could be counted, and compared, and proven. And slowly, the other way of seeing, the quieter one, began to fade. But it did not disappear completely. It remained somewhere, just beyond attention, waiting, perhaps, for the right moment to return. And so, I began to grow older. Not suddenly, not in any single moment, but slowly, in the quiet way that most changes happen. Days passed, then months, and without noticing, I began to see things differently. The world did not change, but something in me did. The questions I once held became less important. Or perhaps, they simply had no place to go. And so they grew quiet. I learned to speak differently, to describe things in ways that others would understand. If I met someone new, I did not show them my drawings. Instead, I spoke about things they expected. Geography, history, numbers, facts that could be confirmed, things that could be measured. And they were satisfied. They would say, "This is a sensible person." And I would agree. And so, I lived my life among grown-ups. I met many people. I spoke with them often. I listened. I answered. Everything seemed normal. But I was alone. Not completely alone. There were always voices, always movement, always presence. But alone, in the way that matters. Until one day, something happened. It happened many years later. At a time when I had already become what the grown-ups would call a reasonable person. I was flying alone, far from any city, far from any road, above a landscape that stretched without end. And then, something in my engine failed. Not suddenly, not violently, but quietly, in a way that left no room for doubt. So I descended, down into the desert. I found myself alone, more alone than I had ever been before. There was no one nearby. No houses. No voices. No signs of life at all. Only the desert. And the sky above it. When night came, the temperature fell quickly. The heat of the day disappeared, as if it had never been there. I lay down on the sand, 1,000 miles from anywhere. Above me, the stars began to appear, one by one, quietly, without asking anything of me. I had very little water. Just enough, perhaps, for a few days. And yet, in that silence, there was something else. Something I had not felt for a long time. At daybreak, I was awakened. Not by noise. Not by movement. But by a voice. A small voice. Very gentle. It said, "If you please, draw me a sheep." I sat up at once, as if I had been struck by something invisible. I looked around me. The desert was empty. The sky was clear. There was no one there. And yet, the voice had been real. I turned toward the sound. And there, standing in the sand, was a small figure. Not lost. Not afraid. Not even surprised to see me. He stood very still, as if he had always been there. I blinked once, then again, but nothing changed. The desert remained empty, except for him. He was neither tired, nor thirsty, nor afraid. There was no sign that he had come from far away. And yet, nothing about him belonged to this place. He looked at me quietly, as if waiting. Not impatient, not uncertain, simply waiting. And then, he repeated, "If you please, draw me a sheep." There was no hesitation in his voice. No explanation. No reason given. As though the request required none. I did not ask him where he had come from. I did not ask how he had arrived. In that moment, those questions did not seem important. There was only this, a small voice, and a simple request. I hesitated. It had been a long time since I had drawn anything, and I had been told, many years ago, to put such things aside. But he was waiting. So I took out a piece of paper, and I began to draw. Not a sheep. Not exactly. What I drew instead was something I remembered well. The boa constrictor. The same drawing I had made as a child. Closed. From the outside. I handed it to him. He looked at it carefully. And then he said, "No, I do not want an elephant inside a boa constrictor. The boa constrictor is very dangerous. And the elephant is too large. I want a sheep." So I tried again. I drew another sheep. This one looked tired. He studied it and shook his head. "No, this one is already sick. Make me another." So I drew again. This time, I tried to make it stronger. He looked at it, and after a moment, he said, "This is not a sheep. This is a ram. It has horns." I drew a third one. Carefully, trying to get it right. But he was not satisfied. "This one is too old. I want a sheep that will live a long time." And I began to understand. This was not going to be simple. By this time, I was beginning to lose patience. Not with him, but with myself. Nothing I drew seemed to be right. And yet, he continued to look at each one with complete attention, as if it mattered. So I drew something else. Quickly this time, without trying to make it perfect. It was only a box, with 3 small holes in the side. And I said to him, "This is the box. The sheep you want is inside." For a moment, he said nothing. Then his face lit up. "That is exactly the way I wanted it. Do you think this sheep will need a lot of grass. And just like that, everything became simple again. After that, he asked me many questions. Not all at once, and not in any particular order. They came slowly, as though each one had been waiting its turn. He wanted to know what I was doing there, why I was alone, what the machine was that had brought me down from the sky. He listened carefully to everything I said, but when I asked him questions, he did not always answer. Sometimes, he would simply look away, as if the answer belonged somewhere else. And yet, there was no impatience in him. Only a quiet certainty that what mattered would be said in time. After a while, he returned to the subject of the sheep. "Do you think," he asked, "that this sheep will need a lot of grass?" I looked at him. "There is very little grass where you come from." He nodded. "My planet is very small." There was no pride in the way he said it. Only a quiet statement. I reassured him. "The sheep I have given you is very small." He seemed to consider this. Then he leaned closer to look at the drawing again. "Not so small," he said softly. "Look, he has fallen asleep." After a moment, he spoke again. "If this sheep eats too much grass..." He paused, as if following the thought to its end. "Will it wander away?" I smiled. "If you tie it, it will stay where you put it. And if it tries to leave, you can always lead it back." He seemed troubled by this. "Tie it? But where would it go?" He looked out across the desert, then back at me. "My planet is very small. If it walks straight ahead, it cannot go very far." After that, he became very thoughtful. He looked at the drawing again, then at the horizon, as if something far away had come to mind. "If the sheep eats bushes," he said slowly, "then it will also eat flowers." I hesitated. "Yes," I said, "even flowers." He fell silent. The wind moved lightly across the sand. "And flowers with thorns?" Again, I answered, "Yes, even those." He did not speak for a long time, and I began to feel that this question mattered more than it seemed. What is the use of thorns? The question came suddenly, with a kind of quiet insistence. I was busy with my engine, trying to understand what had gone wrong. The work required attention and patience, so I answered quickly, without thinking. Thorns are of no use at all. They are simply a kind of spite. He looked at me, not with anger, but with something deeper. I do not believe you. There was a pause. And in that pause, I understood that I had answered too quickly. He did not reply at once. He lowered his head. And for a while, he said nothing at all. Then, very softly, he spoke again. If someone loves a flower, of which just one exists, among all the millions and millions of stars, that is enough to make him happy when he looks at the stars. He paused, then added, but if the sheep eats the flower, it is as if all the stars were suddenly extinguished. He looked up. Is that not important? I stood there, holding my tools, not knowing what to say. The engine, which had seemed so important, no longer mattered in that moment. I had answered, like a grown-up, quickly, carelessly, without listening to what was truly being asked. He was looking at me, and I could see now that his question had not been about thorns at all. It had been about something else. Something small. Something fragile. Something that mattered more than anything else. So I put down my tools, and I listened. He did not speak right away. He looked down at the sand, and then, very slowly, he sat down. There was something in his silence that I could not ignore. Something heavier than his small voice. He drew a line in the sand with his finger. Then another. As if he were thinking, without using words. I waited. And after a while, he said, almost to himself, "It is very small. My planet. And I have only one flower." He stopped, as though that was already more than he had meant to say. I did not interrupt him. I did not ask any more questions. Instead, I sat down beside him. The sand was still warm from the sun. The wind had quieted, and the sky above us was very clear. After a while, I said gently, "The sheep I gave you will not harm your flower." He did not answer at once, but I could feel that he was listening. "If you like," I added, "I will dry you a muzzle for the sheep, so that it cannot eat what you wish to protect." He lifted his head slightly, and for the first time since speaking, there was something softer in his silence. He listened carefully, and after a moment, he nodded. "Yes, that would be good." He turned slightly, as if imagining it. "The sheep will need it to be safe." There was something thoughtful in the way he said this. Not worried, not afraid, but careful, as though he already understood the importance of small protections. "Will it be difficult," he asked, "to draw I shook my head. No. It is a simple thing. And yet, as I said this, I knew that it was not simple at all. So I began to draw again. Carefully this time, trying to make it right. A simple muzzle, with straps, and a fastening, something that would fit around the sheep's mouth. I handed it to him. He looked at it quietly. Then he said, "The strap, it is not very strong. And there is no way to tie it properly." He pointed to the drawing. "You say, it could fall off." I looked at it again. And I had to admit, he was right. I took the drawing back and studied it more closely. He was right. There was no proper strap. No way to fasten it securely. I reached for my pencil again. To correct it. To make it better. But he stopped me. "No," he said quietly. "That is enough." He looked at the drawing once more, as if accepting it, just as it was. "You do not have much time," he added. I paused. "How do you know that?" He did not answer. He simply looked at the broken machine beside me. And in that silence, I understood that he had noticed everything. After that, he spoke more freely. Not all at once, but little by little, as though each thought had to be carefully chosen. "My home," he said, "is very small. So small that I can watch the sunset many times in a single day." I looked at him. "How is that possible?" He gave a small smile. "You only need to move your chair a little, and the sun returns." He paused. "Sometimes," he added softly, "I watch the sunset 44 times." There was no pride in his voice. Only something quieter. Something I could not yet name. "You like sunsets very much," I said to him. He did not answer at once. Then, very softly, he replied, "When one is very sad, one loves sunsets." I looked at him. "Were you very sad on the day you watched 44 times?" He did not answer. He simply turned away and looked toward the horizon, as if the question had already been answered. After that, he spoke of his planet again. More slowly this time, as though remembering. "There were seeds," he said, "everywhere in the soil. Good seeds. And bad ones. They waited quietly, hidden, until the right moment came. And then they would grow. Some became small plants, harmless. But others required attention. If one is not careful, He said, "They take over everything. The most dangerous of all," he said, "are the baobabs. At first, they look very small, almost like the others. It is easy to ignore them, to think they do not matter. But they grow, slowly, quietly, and if one waits too long, it is already too late. Their roots spread deep. Their trunks break the ground. And on a small planet, that is enough to tear everything apart. So," he said, "it is a matter of discipline. It is a question of discipline." He repeated, "When you have finished your own morning tasks, you must attend carefully to the planet." He spoke simply, as if describing something obvious. "You must pull up the baobabs as soon as you can recognize them. They look just like rose bushes when they are very young. So you must learn to tell them apart. It is tedious work, but very easy. And if you delay, even a little, you will regret it." And then, one day, there was a different seed. He remembered it clearly, more clearly than the others. It did not look like the rest. He said, "It grew slowly, carefully, as though it were preparing for something. At first, there was only a small shoot, delicate, unlike the others. He watched it every day, without quite knowing why. And then, he said softly, one morning, it was there. But it was not like the others. It did not open at once. Instead, it prepared itself, very carefully, very slowly. It chose its colors, arranged its petals, as though it wished to appear at exactly the right moment. Days passed, and still, it remained closed, hidden inside its green chamber. He watched it every morning, with growing curiosity and a kind of quiet anticipation. It is going to be something remarkable, he thought, but he did not yet know what kind of flower it would become. And then, one morning, it opened. Not all at once, but slowly, as though it were waking. Petal by petal, with great care. And when it was finally revealed, it was beautiful, perfectly arranged, radiant in the morning light. The little prince could not look away. He had never seen anything like it. And the flower, as if aware of his gaze, spoke. She said, "I am scarcely awake. Please excuse me. My petals are not yet in order." The little prince was astonished. He had expected something delicate, but not like this. Not so precise. Not so composed. "You are very beautiful," he said, almost without thinking. The flower seemed pleased, but she did not show it directly. "Am I not?" she replied gently. "And I was born at the same moment as the sun." There was something in her voice. Not pride, but something close to it. The little prince did not question her. He simply listened and watched her, as though he had already begun to belong to her presence. After that, she began to speak more often. Not always clearly, and not always truthfully, but always with intention. "I think," she said one morning, "I should like some breakfast." The little prince hurried to fetch water. He did not question her. He did not hesitate. Each day, he brought her what she needed. And sometimes, more than she asked for. She complained of the wind, of the cold, of the drafts in the evening air. And he listened, carefully, as though each word mattered. At times, she would speak of her strength. "I am not afraid of tigers," she said once. "My claws are sufficient." And she showed him her thorns, as though they were something formidable. The little prince did not understand. "There are no tigers on my planet," he said gently, "and tigers do not eat flowers." She seemed slightly offended. "I am not a flower," she replied. There was a pause. Then more softly, "But I am delicate." And in that moment, he did not know whether to admire her or to protect her. The little prince did not always understand her. Her words were often light, sometimes contradictory, and he listened to them, as one listens to something exact. He believed what she said, rather than what she meant. When she spoke of her strength, he took it seriously. When she complained, he tried to solve it. He did not yet know that some words are not meant to be answered, but to be understood. And so, without intending to, he began to feel confused. It was not a sudden decision. There was no moment when he chose to leave. Only a quiet feeling, growing day by day. He still cared for her, watered her, protected her from the wind, listened to her words. But something inside him no longer felt at rest. He did not understand her. And because of that, he began to doubt himself, to wonder whether he had been mistaken. And so, without fully knowing why, he prepared to leave. On the morning of his departure, he put his planet in order. As he always did, he cleaned the volcanoes, pulled up the last small shoots, and watered the flower more carefully than usual. She did not speak at first. The air was very still. Then, softly, she said, "I have been foolish. Please forgive me." He was surprised. He had never heard her speak like this. "Try to be happy," she added. There was no reproach in her voice. No complaint. Only a quiet gentleness. He hesitated, not knowing what to say. Then he left. He did not look back. Not because he did not care, but because he could not. The sky was clear that morning, and the air was still. A flock of wild birds passed overhead, their wings moving together. In quiet rhythm, he watched them for a moment. Then, he reached out and held on. The birds lifted him gently, away from the ground, away from the small planet, and everything he had known. The rose remained behind. Quiet, unseen, and very much present. He began to travel from one small planet to another, each one different, each one inhabited by a single figure. He arrived quietly, observed, listened, and then moved on. Some of these worlds were no larger than a house. Some were even smaller. Yet each contained something complete. A way of thinking. A way of being. He did not judge them. He simply noticed and remembered. The first planet he visited was inhabited by a king. He sat upon a simple throne, dressed in robes that covered the entire surface of his world, as though everything belonged to him. When he saw the little prince, he exclaimed, "Ah, here is a subject." The little prince looked around. There was no one else. How can he know me? He wondered. He had never met the king before. But the king did not question this. For him, everyone was a subject. The king spoke at length about authority and obedience. "It is necessary," he said, "to require only what can be done. If I were to order a general to turn himself into a bird, and he did not obey, that would not be the general's fault. It would be mine." The little prince listened, carefully, trying to understand. "What do you rule over?" he asked. The king replied at once, "Everything." He gestured toward the sky, the stars, the planet, even the little prince himself. The little prince stayed only a short time. The king continued to speak, to explain, to declare, to command. But there was very little to do. And very little to see. After a while, the little prince grew tired. "I must continue my journey," he said. The king objected at once. "I appoint you as my ambassador," he declared. The little prince did not reply. He did not argue. He simply left. And as he went, he thought, "Grown-ups are very strange." The second planet was inhabited by a vain man. When he saw the little prince, he raised his hat at once, as though greeting an audience. "Ah," he exclaimed, "here comes an admirer." The little prince looked at him. "What does that mean?" he asked. "To admire," said the vain man, "means to recognize that I am the most handsome, the best dressed, the richest, and the most intelligent man on this planet. But you are alone here," said the little prince. The man did not seem to hear. He simply smiled. "Clap your hands," said the vain man. The little prince hesitated. But then, he clapped. The man raised his hat in response and smiled. Again, the little prince clapped. Again, the man lifted his hat. This continued for some time, without change, without variation. At last, the little prince grew tired. "What does it mean, to admire?" he asked again. But the vain man only heard the applause. The little prince did not stay long. There was nothing more to learn. Nothing that changed. Only the same gesture, repeated again and again. At last, he stopped clapping and lowered his hands. "I must go," he said quietly. The vain man did not object. He was already smiling, already lifting his hat, as though the applause had never ended. The little prince left. And as he went, he thought, "Grown-ups are very strange." The third planet was inhabited by a drunkard. He sat alone, surrounded by bottles, some full, some empty. He did not look up at first. The little prince approached quietly. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I am drinking," the man replied. His voice was dull, almost without movement. "Why are you drinking?" asked the little prince. "To forget." "What do you wish to forget?" "That I am ashamed." "Why are you ashamed?" asked the little prince. The man lowered his head and answered, "Because I drink." There was silence. The little prince did not speak. He waited, but nothing changed. The bottles remained. The man remained. And the circle remained, unbroken. The little prince stayed only a moment longer. There was nothing more to ask. Nothing more to understand. The man did not look up. He did not speak again. The bottles remained where they were. Some full, some empty. The little prince turned away. Slowly, without a word. And as he left, he thought, grown-ups are certainly very strange. The fourth planet belonged to a businessman. He was busy, very busy. So busy that he did not look up when the little prince arrived. 3 and 2 make 5. 5 and 7 make 12. He murmured, 12 and 3 make 15. The little prince waited. Quietly. At last, he asked, "What are you doing?" The man raised his head briefly. "I am counting," he said, "and I am serious." There was no impatience, only certainty. "What are you counting?" asked the little prince. The businessman replied, "The little things you see up there." He pointed toward the sky. "The stars." The little prince looked up at the countless points of light. "And why are you counting them?" "To own them," said the businessman. "I own them all." The little prince was surprised. "How can you own the stars?" The man did not hesitate. "Because they belong to me." He returned to his numbers, as though nothing more needed to be explained. "What does it mean, to own the stars?" asked the little prince. The businessman looked annoyed. "It means," he said, "that they belong to me." "And what do you do with them?" "I manage them. I count them, and count them again." "It is difficult work. But I am a serious man." The little prince was silent. He thought of his flower, of watering her, of protecting her from the wind. That, he understood. But this he did not. The little prince stayed a little while longer, listening, watching. The numbers continued, without pause, without end. At last, he spoke quietly. "I have a flower," he said, "and I water her every day. I have 3 volcanoes, and I clean them each week. It is of use to my volcanoes." He added, "And it is of use to my flower. But you," he paused, "you are of no use to the stars." The businessman did not answer. he was already counting again. So the little prince left. The fifth planet was very small. Just enough space for a lamppost and a man. The man was lighting a lamp, then extinguishing it, then lighting it again, without pause. "Good evening," he said, as he lit the lamp. "Good morning," he added, as he put it out. The little prince watched. This was not like the others. There was something faithful in what he was doing. "Why do you keep lighting it?" asked the little prince. "It is the order," said the lamplighter. "What order?" "To light the lamp, and to put it out. Once every minute." The little prince was surprised. "A minute?" "Yes. The planet turns faster now. It did not used to be like this. There was a time when I could rest, when morning and evening came only once a day. But now," he lit the lamp again, "there is no time to stop." The little prince watched him. There was no pride in what he did, no need to be admired, no desire to own anything. Only the quiet repetition of his task. "I like this man," the little prince said to himself. "He is perhaps not so absurd as the others. It is because he is thinking of something else besides himself." And as he watched the small light appear and disappear, he felt, for the first time, a kind of quiet understanding. For a moment, the little prince thought he might remain there, with the lamplighter. There was something comforting in the rhythm, something steady, something true. "If you like, I could stay," he said. "We could watch the sunsets together." The lamplighter paused, but only for a second. Then he shook his head. "There is no time. I must keep going." The lamp lit again, and went out again, without rest. The little prince did not leave at once. He remained for a moment, watching the light appear, disappear, and appear again. It was beautiful in its own way, not because it changed, but because it did not. At last, he turned away. "This one," he thought, "is the only one I might have called a friend." But the planet was too small. There was no room for two. So he continued his journey. As the little prince travels, from one small world to another, he meets many people. Each one seems certain of what matters. And yet, each one feels alone. Some seek power. Some seek admiration. Some seek to forget. And some never stop counting. But among them all, there is one who simply does his work. Quietly, faithfully, and perhaps, for the first time, the little prince feels something close to understanding. But not quite. When we look at the worlds the little prince has visited, we may begin to recognize something. Not in the stars, but in ourselves. Each person he meets is certain of what matters, king believes in authority. The vain man believes in admiration. The businessman believes in numbers. And yet, none of them seem at peace. They are busy, but not fulfilled. Certain, but not content. It is easy to see them as strange, even a little absurd. But perhaps they are not so different from us. As we grow older, we begin to measure things. We count. We compare. We try to define what is important. And slowly, we forget how to simply notice. The little prince does not understand these people. But he does something else. He observes. He questions. And he feels. He reminds us that meaning is not always found in what we do, but in how we see. And perhaps that is why, among all the strange and serious worlds, it is the lamplighter who feels closest to something true. Not because his life is easy, but because it is not centered on himself. And in that quiet devotion, the little prince begins, just slightly, to understand. And now, it is time to rest. Let the story settle, like quiet stars, in the night sky. If you wish, you may continue this journey in the next part. But for now, close your eyes and drift gently into sleep.